Parole
An easy target.
is reconvening at Caddo Correctional Center. We're here to consider a case of Jerry Jamerson, a revocation with Mr. Jamerson, as a Jamerson. Jamerson,
Yes, sir.
the Jamerson, would you please give your full name and your Department of Correction ID?
Gary Jamerson, 43-1959.
Thank you, Mr. Jamerson. My name is Alvin Roche. I will chair the panel. To my left is Ms. Bonnie Jackson. To my right is Ms. Pearl Watt. Would the officer in the room please introduce yourself and give your rank?
Deputy Richardson classification.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Mr. Jamerson, you're here today for a revocation hearing because you have been accused of violating the conditions of your parole contract and your sex offender contract. Do you have an attorney present?
No, sir, I don't.
Do you want an attorney present?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay, do you have a parole revocation questionnaire in front of you?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, is that your signature dated January 6, 2023?
Yes, sir.
Is all information correct?
Yes, sir.
And at the time of this arrest, you were unemployed?
Yes, sir.
So you're ready to proceed without an attorney?
Yes, I am, sir.
Mr. Jamerson, you're here today for a revocation hearing because you have been accused of violating the conditions of your parole contract, your sex offender contract. Condition number 4, you committed the offense of unlawful presence of a sex offender on December 10th, 2022, when you went to Chuck E. Cheese, and which has a freestanding video game arcade within that business in Bossier City. The victim of your crime was between the ages of 7 and 11 years old. Therefore, you cannot be in a business that caters to juveniles. On December 16th, 2022, you admitted to your parole officer that you had been in the business for a birthday party. Section 4, parentheses 1 of the sex offender contract prohibits anyone convicted of a sex crime where the victim is where the victim is under 13 years old for being within 1,000 feet from a freestanding video arcade. According to according to Louisiana Revised Statute 15.538. How do you plead?
Guilty, sir.
Your case has been assigned to me. Mr. Jamerson, would you like to make a statement on your behalf?
Yes, sir. With respect, I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you this morning. And at the same time, I'm very sorrowful for the incident which makes this hearing necessary. On my offense, my oldest son, who's 25 now, he was 1 when I left. And so upon moving back to Shreveport, I had only been in Shreveport a month and a half, and I hadn't seen him. He's married, he's got a wife, he's got 3 children. And it was the Christmas season, and this is my first time being out for Christmas, and my grandson was having a birthday party, and the excitement and the emotionalism and the holidays, sir, I made a very poor judgment mistake. I had a lapse in judgment. I made a disastrous decision that has brought disastrous consequences.
Okay, Mr. Jamerson, at the time of the parole, you reported to your parole officer within 72 hours of your release. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
At that time, did the parole officer go over your parole contract with you?
Yes, sir, he did.
And you signed that contract. By signing that contract, you said that you would follow all stipulations of that contract.
Yes, sir, Mr. Roche.
You also went over your sex offender contract, which I think is condition number 13 of your parole contract. Am I right?
Yes, sir. May I make a statement on that as well?
No, you cannot. And you went over that sex offender contract.
Yes, sir.
That contract say that you should not be in the presence of any minor children. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
It also stated that you couldn't be in any business or establishment other than a business that had a freestanding video game arcade.
Yes, sir.
Did you receive an invitation to your grandson's birthday party?
Yes, sir.
Where did that invitation say that party would be?
He said it was gonna be
So where was that birthday party
at Chuck E. Cheese, sir.
Okay. How old are you, Mr. Jamerson?
I'm 59, sir.
Do you know exactly what Chuck E. Cheese is?
Yes, sir.
Where parents, grandparents take their children and have a good time. And sometimes the parents and grandparents sit at a table and let the children just roam and play with the video games.
Yes, sir.
Is this a place where sex offenders should be?
No, sir.
And you deliberately, premeditatedly walked in that door, knowing that your victim would be there. I understand your victim was there, because the victim was your stepchild. Am I correct?
The victim was there. Yes, sir.
And she was your stepchild. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
And from this offense, I understand result was that you have a son about your stepdaughter. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Was your son at the birthday party?
Not my son with my former stepdaughter. No, sir.
But your stepdaughter was there.
My former stepdaughter was there, sir.
So you not only violated your sex offender contract, you violated your parole contract because you came in contact with the victim.
My parole officer told us, me and Ms. Darnell, that as far as that consent, she would have to consent in writing that she didn't have a problem communicating with me. And our parole officer,
I understand all that. But you went into an establishment with a freestanding video game arcade, knowing that you were violating your sex offender contract. Am I right or am I wrong?
you're right, Mr. Roche.
Ms. Jackson, you have any
I
questions?
do. Mr. Jamerson, what was your original sentence on, what were you convicted of?
Convicted of forcible rape,
How much time did you receive?
40 years,
Much of that 40-year sentence did you serve?
22 years.
So you still have 18 years left to serve, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
How long had you been out of prison?
8 months.
I was looking through the parole officer's notes. Apparently you were attending sex offender classes.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, explain to me, okay, apparently you impregnated the victim, and so she has a son that you're the father of. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Whose birthday party did you attend? I'm trying to understand the connections and the relationship.
This was
Whose
it was my grandson for my other son, who is the son of me and my ex-wife.
I see. So it's the victim's half brother,
Yes, ma'am.
and it was his son that was having a birthday.
Yes, ma'am.
And were you aware that the stepdaughter would be there?
No, no, I didn't. Yes. No.
Okay, well, you're giving me two answers. Help me understand.
I can't.
What kind of relationship does the victim have with your son, her half brother?
They have a good relationship.
Right. So it wouldn't have been unusual for her to come to her nephew's birthday.
No, it wouldn't have been unusual, ma'am.
Why didn't you think about that before you went?
If I may, we were under the belief that through my parole officer that having done that letter, and she sent a letter to my sentencing judge and sent a letter to him, and he advised me to carry a letter with me, we were under the impression that we were in compliance with, because that's what he told us to do. That's what he informed Ms. Donnell to do.
I mean, your parole officer, what kind of letter are you referring to?
It's a letter where she stated that
She, I don't, she who,
Miss Darnell, my
Thanks.
former stepdaughter,
Right.
saying that she was not in objection to communications with me and with me coming around the family.
And so she wrote that letter to whom?
She sent a copy to my former PO in St. Tammany Parish, Brandon Warnado, and sent a copy to my sentencing judge.
Okay. So how did the parole officer become aware that you had attended this party?
Okay, my parole officer here, Agent Dupree, he informed me that some member of the extended family called in and told them I was there.
But your stepdaughter, your former stepdaughter, was not the person who informed the parole officer.
That is correct, ma'am.
And I can certainly understand, Mr. Jamerson, after having spent 22 years in prison, that you would want to be around your family. I do understand that. I do.
Yes, ma'am.
And it was a lapse of judgment to go to Chuck E. Cheese.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just one person, but I don't know that that lapse of judgment is worth another 18 years. But that's just me. What have you learned from this mistake?
Ma'am, I learned that there is no one and no thing worth me jeopardizing me complying with the provisions of my parole. With me complying with the provisions of parole, nothing and no one.
What how long when were you detained? You have been detained since December of this year, is that correct?
December 16th, yes, ma'am.
From May 16, when you were paroled, until December 16, in that 6-month period, were you employed?
I had a job for about 3 months, 3 days after I got released as a dishwasher at a restaurant. And then I got carpal tunnel. My hands started acting up real bad, and I went to the orthopedist, and he said I have a severe case of advanced carpal tunnel. And so I began to take odd jobs in St. Tammany Parish, and I was able to maintain my rent and my fees and so forth.
So you were current with your fees? Because I don't see alleged as a violation.
I didn't understand you, ma'am.
I said, so you were current with your fees.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have to pay for the sex offender treatment?
I had to pay for the classes bi-weekly.
How much was that?
It started out at $20 every 2 weeks, then it went up to $25 every 2 weeks.
And you were paying that as well?
Yes, ma'am.
How many sessions did you attend before you got detained?
The time I lived in St. Tammany Parish, I went to all of them for the 7 months I was there. And then I moved to Shreveport, and I was here a month and a couple of weeks before this incident.
All right, that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have a question.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, now.
So why did you move to Shreveport? What was the rationale?
But this is my hometown, man, and I wanted to move home. I do have some family still alive, still here.
Okay, so you had to pay the registration again at a new address?
Yes, ma'am. I had to pay fees again, and had to register again. Yes, ma'am.
But it was worth it for you to move from St. Tammany to Shreveport to be around family?
I thought so. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and that transfer went smoothly, and that's good. You did, do any of your family members have a copy of the sex offender contract or a copy of your conditions of parole?
No, ma'am, they don't.
Let me just present that to you, that you give them a copy of your conditions so they can help you stay between the lines.
Yes, ma'am.
That they will stop inviting you to stuff that you're not allowed to go to.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all I had.
Mr. Jamerson,
Yes, sir.
I will be quite frank with you. You deliberately, premeditatedly violated your sex offender contract because you knew that you shouldn't go. And that letter is for the victim. This was not a private party. You were in the presence of the public. There were multiple parties celebrating birthday parties and there were children. That was not a part of your party. This is a part of the Louisiana revised statute to protect young people in the state of Louisiana. and you deliberately violated this, if it was a house party and you had that letter, it would be a different thing for me. But you deliberately violated your contract. You're doing well in Slidell and the surrounding area. But you chose to move back where family was because you wanted to be in the company of your family. That also includes their children, which you should not be in the same business of house or facility. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir, I do.
Now, Ms. Jackson said that this is not worth another 18 years of incarceration. I agree with it. But when I vote to revoke you, and I will, you'll have a chance to come up for parole again. And if it is the decision of this parents want to revoke you, you need to go back, get all the programs, have good disparate, and you'll come up for a parole hearing in a short period of time.
Yes,
But
sir.
next time, please remember that you are a sex offender. Your victim was under the age of 13, and you have strict restrictions, and you have to follow those.
Yes, sir.
At this time, would you like to make a closing statement on your behalf?
Yes, sir, Mr. Roche. As I mentioned earlier, eh, this was not a dismissal or just me just flipping off the provisions of my parole, sir, not at all. I know it looks that way. Again, it was the emotionalism, it was the holidays, it was all of that. It was seeing my son, it was seeing them for the first time. It wasn't and that's what I'm trying to say is this, sir. I'm very sorry about that. I was doing so well, as you mentioned. And I was doing good as well, even at where I was living at, giving back to society and so forth. It's never my intention to reoffend. That is not even an issue with me to reoffend. Sir, this was just an isolated incident, not to minimize it at all. It was my family. And as you mentioned, I was doing really well. And also to restate again, I was under the impression that under the advisement of my parole officer, that in the absence of any other information, that letter was substantial enough because we didn't get any other information from anybody. I brought it up to him every month at visits, and he kept saying that, they never encountered that before, and so that's what he advised us to do. And so I thought I was legal under that.
Mr. Jamerson, you are giving that letter more scope than it had. It said that you go around the victim and your family. It didn't say you could go to a public place where there's a freestanding video game arcade and mingle among the crowd, which included minor children.
Yes, sir.
That letter was for the victim and your immediate family.
Yes, sir.
Now, I have one question before I call for the vote. We have been in Shreveport a month and a half, 2 months before the birthday party. And I think you moved in September, October. Am I right?
I moved in November, early November.
Early November, so you had been there a month and a half. Why didn't you see your son before that? You said that was the first time you were gonna see your son. You went to Shreveport, Louisiana, a whole month and a half, and not once did you see your son until you went to the birthday party. Why did you wait to see your son at a children's party?
I did not have transportation, sir, and he
Yeah.
worked.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Mr. Jamerson, I find you guilty of violating condition number 4, criminal activity. I also find you in violation of acts against Section 4.1 of the Louisiana Revised Statute. Sex offenders who've been convicted of and a victim that's less than 13 should not be within 1,000 feet of a video game arcade. And I revoke the supervision. Ms. Wise.
Mr. Jamerson, I'm just gonna be honest with you. Last night when I read this before I met you, I was just kind of predetermined what I was gonna do. That's why these hearings are so important. I'm a retired probation parole officer. And we do look at your history. We look at, for me, it was your honesty. You didn't, you didn't do a dog and pony show. You owned it, what you did. But that's why I asked you about the conditions of your contract and the conditions of parole. Don't have nothing to do with the letter. Your sound footing is on the conditions of parole that you have a copy of and your sex offender contract. That's where your solid footing is on. And I may be wrong, but I got the impression that when you got invited to that party, you were so elated because you felt like your family was welcoming you, and you hadn't been invited to anything, and like you said, you just lost it because family is so important. For that reason, my vote is to do not revoke and return you. I'm just one vote though. You admitted to your violation, and I do find you guilty. And I want you to report to probation parole for the next 3 weeks if you get out weekly to get acclimated to supervision and what you're supposed to do. And again, I encourage you to give your family, actually, when you report in, ask for a couple of copies of your sex offender contract and a couple of copies of your certificate of parole, and let your family see that so they'll know. And they'll know how to invite you to stuff that you can attend and won't violate your freedom. But I'm just one vote. Best wishes to you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mrs. Jackson.
Mr. Jamerson, I was looking through the parole officer's notes, and I don't think I've had a sex offender, even when I was a judge, who was in complete compliance the way you did. You did everything that you were supposed to do. You paid for your registration and notification. You paid your other fees. You did everything you were supposed to do. You went to sex offender treatment. And sometimes we forget that sex offenders, and I wouldn't say this was a terrible crime that you committed, but you're a human being and you have emotions. And family is important. And sometimes we make it so hard on sex offenders that we set them up to fail. And I have seen that time and time again as a judge. You're too poor to pay for the notifications because you can't get a job. You can't get a job because you're a sex offender. You can't live certain places because you're a sex offender. And so we put so many restrictions, and rightly so, because some sex offenders are dangerous predators. And rightly so. But again, we can't lose sight of the fact that we're dealing with a human being. And I can understand your need to be in Shreveport with your family, because when we do parole hearings, one of the things we look at, is there a family support network around the person? You didn't have that in Slidell. And so it'd be only natural for you to want to be with family, and I understand that. So today, my vote is going to be do not revoke, to return you to supervision, and add the same special conditions as Mrs. Wise. I think you've learned from this experience. I don't think you were there as a predator. I don't think you were leering at other children. You were there because you wanted to have that opportunity to be with the family. And so my vote today is do not return to supervision.
Thank you.
Mr. Jamerson,
Yes, sir.
you have received 2 votes. Do not revoke, return to supervision. 1 vote to revoke your supervision. The outcome of today's hearing, your supervision is not revoked, and you will return back to supervision. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, panel. Yes.
Family is so important. That's what Miss Jackson said in her end speech there. Yeah, it is so important. It's so important that he raped his 13-year-old daughter so often that she got pregnant. Yeah, it's really important to this guy. Family is so important. That's why when he got out of prison, he didn't spend 1 day seeing his son. No. Instead, he waited till he could go to Chuck E. Cheese so that he could see his victim there. How terrifying that man is roaming around Chuck E. Cheese. What about him makes you say that I think he went there for his family and on to do what? Why? Because he raped his stepdaughter under the age of 13 and impregnated her? Because you had a child with your stepdaughter? Miss Jackson, what about that makes you feel, because he paid his dues? Because he worked as a dishwasher and then that only lasted 3 months? Then he did odd jobs? Yeah, I wonder what odd jobs he did, huh? Mr. Roche hit it on the head. If family was so important, you would have gone out to see your son. You would have found a way. You would have taken a bus. Next question is, what people invite? Why would they invite him to this thing? He got an invitation. Who would invite him? Maybe they invited him so he would come and they can send him back to prison where he belongs. 40-year sentence. Someone paroled that cockroach. What, 17 years in? He would have had another 18 years left to serve. He was only out 8 months before he showed up at Chuck E. Cheese. His victims in the Chuck E. Cheese. You know, when the hearing started, I was like, kind of like, I know he's a cockroach, but he went to Chuck E. Cheese to see his grandson and his, and maybe, but then the story comes out, he raped this wasn't like some cockroach that, the story really couldn't have gotten worse, except unless he would have done something again. It couldn't have gotten worse. How is Mr. O'Shea the only one with some reason? They could have sent him back there. He would have gotten another chance of parole. Let him go suffer. Suffer. This isn't even about retribution, suffer. Let him go get punished. He knew the consequences of going. He knew the risk he was taking, and it was blatant risk. All he needed was one person in that crowd to say, what is he doing here? I'm going to call his parole officer. What did he didn't calculate the odds? Miss Wise and Miss Jackson, not Miss Jackson. I love you, Miss Jackson, but what are you doing? Miss Wise, I've written her off a long time. Attention to what's going on. What did she say? She said, you owned it? It's like Miss Wise is like totally, like, I don't think she's paying any attention. Oh, that's what it was. She said, you owned it. You owned it in the sense of you were honest. And I'm real proud of you that you were honest. You owned it. You're talking about someone who raped their stepdaughter, impregnated her. Then he showed up to a party at Chuck E. Cheese, which he can't be at. There are other kids, and his victim is there. His victim had to see him walk in there. Everyone would have had to have seen him walk in there. How is that okay? There's no redeeming factors in the cockroach. He paid a couple bills on time, went to a couple classes. He was out 8 months before he violated. If family was so important, he would have gone to see his son. And if his son wanted to see him, he would have gone to see him, but he didn't. The whole thing was made up. He wanted to go there so he could victimize his victim all over again. He wanted to... He probably couldn't wait to get into Chuck E. Cheese. He's, do you realize, we're dealing with a diseased mind. We're dealing with someone who has a serious disease. He's a cockroach. He's a predator. He made his way to Chuck E. Cheese, and all those children were there, including his victim. And the board is just like, well, I get it. You really wanted to see your family. Mr. O'Shea, oh man, I want to jump through the screen and hug him. I really did. There was no reason to feel bad for that man. There was no reason to feel empathy towards him. There was nothing in his actions that would make it say, I feel really bad that you're gonna have to go and get locked up again. He knowingly violated his parole. He took the risk. If he can't control himself to do something that takes so much premeditation, that has so much obvious risk, then it shows me that he still doesn't have impulse control, and he still is a risk to society and children. Just for that purpose, not even punishment, just to keep our children safe, you should have realized that this person cannot control himself and he needs to be locked up. And they should have kept him locked up. And I'm not changing my mind. And with that, I'll let you go.